Welcome everybody. I apologize for not being in class today, but since there really is very little time before Yontif, and we are going to be possibly missing class later in the week as well, I wanted to get a little bit of the Chiyuv of Nashim in the Leil Seder accomplished today. So hopefully everyone has their packets, as well as a handout, which we will get to in a moment. So we can really try to follow along. And I think really in this next 15 minutes or so, we should really get a good head start in terms of understanding this issue. And again, it's just as we've been discussing all year in terms of the women's obligation and mitzvah, specifically to Yom Tovim now, right, it's important to ask these questions. We have many people who gather around at the Seder, and women are very particular, as they should be, to complete these mitzvahs, but it's important to understand why and where the sources come from. As we're going to see in the next few minutes, they're not all for the same reasons. So if everyone looks at the next slide, just as a quick outline, and then I'm going to show you the sources which connect to that handout, there are essentially 5 mitzvahs that we accomplish, that we try to fulfill the Seder night. There are many minhagim that we complete and do, but there really are 5 formal mitzvos. 2 min Torah, as you can see, Matzah and Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, and 3 midrabanan, Morer, Daled Kosos, and Halal. Now if we just take a quick moment over to the handout, you will notice this chart is a little bit more broad because it includes not just the Seder night, the mitzvahs of the Seder night. So if you look over here on the, let's see, let's start on the left-hand side, where the mitzvah is lo saseh, but you'll see this is lo saseh min Torah, the bottom is lo saseh midrabanan, and on the right side is aseh min Torah on the bottom, aseh deraisa, and aseh derabanan on the bottom. So if you look over here just very quickly, the first one is Shalol Echol Chametz Bayom Arba'asar, which is Erev Pesach Achar Chatzos. So after midday on Erev Pesach, it's an Isur D'Oraisa to eat Chametz. Here is the pasuk. Look it up again. You have to see the Mefarshim, which explain Lo Tochel Lav Chametz is referring to Erev Pesach. Shalol Echol Chametz Kol Shavas Yamim Shel Pesach. That's the general halach of not eating Chametz on Pesach. That's in Shmos Yud Gimel Gimel V'Lo Yochal Chametz. And then number 3, Shalol Echol Taruvos Chametz Kol Sheva, that for all 7 days you shouldn't eat a mixture of Chametz, Kol Machmetzes Lo Sachelu, which means that even, let's say you had a food, let's say, I don't know, some kind of cholenti type of food, which had barley or other types of Chametz in it, and even if you strained it out and there was nothing left that's physically looking like real Chametz anymore, but it was cooked together in there, that is still considered a mixture of Chametz. It is still usher from the Torah to eat it. And then we have our famous psukim of Bal Yirah, Bal Yimatzeh, Shelo Yireh Chametz Kol Sheva, otherwise known as Bal Yirah, that you should not have any Chametz appear in your, or shouldn't be seen. Shelo Yimatzeh, it shouldn't be found. Shelo Yimatzeh B'Vasechem. Again, obviously there's a lot of details to all of these halachos, on each one in themselves. And obviously, we do 2 things for those of you who've been following along in our nightly shiurim. So we've covered this in great detail, that to avoid the isurim of Bal Yirah Bal Yimatzeh, so typically we do 2 things. We do bittul chametz, and we sell our chametz. Perhaps really a third one, we also burn it. So it's a little bit separate. We're going to see that's actually a mitzvah aseh on the top right. That's why I did not include it here. And then there are the 2 rabbinic los asehs. Achilas chametz biyom arba'asar b'shas revi v'chamishi. So as we know that Chazal prohibited the eating of chametz even earlier on Erev Pesach, even though min Torah it's from Chatzos on, 2 hours earlier during the 4th and 5th hour, Chazal asserted it as well. And 2, the idea of chametz she'avar alav Pesach, chametz that was in your possession on Pesach and now it's after Pesach, that chametz is asur b'achila v'hana, meaning if you didn't sell it properly, then that is asur b'achila v'hana, and that's why it's important to know where you're allowed to shop and so on, which food stores after Pesach. And then on the right side, we have the mitzvah of what's known as tashbisu, lahashbis or biyom arba'asar, to dispose and get rid of the chametz. That's presumably, that's how we do by burning the chametz. Here's the pasuk, lechol matzah b'leil Pesach, as we saw a minute ago. The mitzvah is to eat matzah on leil Pesach, based on the pasuk be'erev tochlu matzos. The mitzvah is Lasaper B'Yetzias Mitzrayim B'Leil Pesach. We're going to talk about that, what we call Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, based on the pasuk V'Yigadet Lebincha B'Yom Hahu. those are the 3 min HaTorah. And then we have quite a few midrabanan. The truth is, the first one really applies Erev Yontif, which is the mitzvah of Bedikas Chametz, right? So that's really before Yontif starts. And then we have the 3 at the Seder, which we're going to talk about tonight: Arba Kosos, Achilas Maror, and Amiras Halal. Those 3 mitzvos are all midrabanan. Again, this is all totally not related to women. This is just the general mitzvos that Chal Yisrael are obligated in. And again, tonight we're going to try to take a little look, or I guess for you guys today, at what the women's obligation is. Just want to mention, because this is obviously a question everybody, and I'm sure everyone is raising their hand to know a teacher to ask the following question: why is it that maror is not up here in the Torah law? After all, there's a pasuk in the Chumash that says al matzos umorim yochluhu, and it's a pasuk in the Torah to eat maror. So why is it an iser d'Rabbanan? So it's not my question; it's the Gemara's question. The Gemara says very simply that what does it mean? Al matzos umorim yochluhu. You should eat it. What's the it? The korban Pesach. So the Gemara says that since we don't have a korban Pesach, the mitzvah min Torah does no longer of maror no longer applies, and the mitzvah of maror b'zman Beis Hamikdash was to eat the maror with the korban Pesach, not to eat the maror by itself. Today, midrabanan, just so we don't forget the tam of maror, so we eat it independently. But b'zman Beis Hamikdash, it was eaten with the korban Pesach. We don't have a korban Pesach, unfortunately, so we don't have the mitzvah min Torah of maror. So of course now you're saying, well, what about matzah? It says al matzah umorim yuchluhu. So why is matzah not down here on the bottom? So if you notice over here, that's because there's another pasuk. There's a second pasuk, be'erev tochlu matzos, that says that night you should eat matzah. Okay, so those are the quick outline of the mitzvos of the night. Let's take a quick look now at the women's obligation. So first, we'll start with a mitzvah that everybody here knows. Let me just extend the screen here a little bit. So everybody knows, because we learned it earlier already, the mitzvah of Dal Kosos. This is going to be a fast one. Amar Yeshua ben Levi, Noshim Chayavos ba'arba Kosas halalu sha'afin hayu ba'osa hani. So this is a concept we've talked about at length this year. I'm not going to spend much more time on it. Women are obligated in the 4 cups because afin hayu ba'osa hanis, they too were involved in the nes, and we had different pshatim what that means. Either they were the cause of the nes, or they were also endangered, and therefore they're obligated to partake in the daled kosos. So just to discuss this for 1 minute, it's an interesting question which we haven't really addressed, but everything we're about to say here really applies back to the conversations we've had on Megillah as well as Hadlakas Neros Chanukah, and that is, why do we need this idea of afin? Why would we have thought that women should be exempt? I know women are exempt from time-bound mitzvos, but that's a Torah law. We know there's a Torah law that women are time-bound mitzvos in general. Of course, there are exceptions, but in general, women are pater from mitzvos hasheser and groma. But who's to say that the same thing applies to rabbinic laws? Maybe that's not true for rabbinic laws. Maybe they're only exempt from time-bound biblical laws. So Tosfos in Maseches Pesachim addresses the question. He says, "Ve'ilav haytaima, if it wasn't for the reason of afin hayabos anis, lo hayu chayavos, we would say that women are not chayav in it. Mishum denoshim peturos mi mitzvos hasheser and groma, because women are pater from mitzvos hasheser and groma. Afagav the arba kosos d'Rabbanan. What we said, it's only d'Rabbanan. There's a famous klal, which is, if you didn't know this, write it down, you'll remember it. This will come up again. Ke'ein de'oraisa tikun. There's a klal of kol the tikun d'Rabbanan. Ke'ein de'oraisa tikun. That whenever Chazal created enactments, different mitzvos, they patterned it based on some source in the Torah, and therefore the rabbinic patterning follows the Torah pattern. So since women are exempt min Torah from time-bound mitzvos, the assumption would have been that women are exempt from rabbinic mitzvos as well. And that's why Tosfos explains that's the need for the Gemara to tell us that women are exempt. Okay, so we know why women are exempt from Dal Kosos. What about the other mitzvos halayla? What about Matzah, Maror, Sipur Yitzis Mitzrayim? We'll start with those. So the Shulchan Aruch, without really much explanation, actually says, Gam hanashim chayavos ba'arba kosos, women are also chayav in d'arba kosos, ubachol mitzvos hanohagos ba'osa halayla, and all mitzvos that apply at night. And the Mishnah Berurah says, Kigom matzah, maror, va'amiras haggadah, like matzah, maror, and the haggadah, Sipur Yitzis Mitzrayim. But it doesn't really explain why. How do we know? So the first one, matzah, we also learned way back in the beginning of the year. It's a famous Gemara, an explicit Gemara. The Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Eliezer, it's a Gemara in Pesachim. Rabbi Eliezer says, Nashim chayavos b'achilas matzah devar Torah. It's a biblical mitzvah for women to eat matzah at the Seder, just like it is for men. There's absolutely no difference. Shenemar, because it says, Lo tocha, lo chametz, and in the same pasuk. We have the pasuk on that sheet, so I'm not going to switch back, but this only shows the beginning of the pasuk. But if you remember, this is not to eat chametz be'erev tochel matzos, and you should eat matzos, or for Shivas Yamim tochel matzos, for 7 days you eat matzos. So kol sheyeshnu b'val tochel chametz, since they're in the same pasuk, the smichos, which we talked about earlier in the year, whoever is obligated to refrain from eating chametz, yeshnu b'achilas matzah, is therefore obligated to eat matzah, meaning since the Torah went out of its way to put the mitzvah of matzah and the isra of eating chametz in the same pasuk, we learn that what applies to one applies to the other, just like a woman, and therefore v'hani nashi nami, women too. However, yeshnu b'val tochel chametz, since they're obligated to refrain from chametz, yeshnam b'kum echol matzah, they're obligated in the kum, the aseh, the get up, to go eat matzah. So this is an important idea. Women are obligated to eat matzah just as much as a man is, and it has nothing to do with afin hayabos anes. In fact, I don't have the slide here, but Tosos asks the question, it's a lengthy Tosos, which asks, what do I need this whole conversation for? Why not say afin? Say women are chayiv because of afin hayabos anes, right? And therefore, why do we need to come up with all these psukim? So Tosos gives two answers. Tosos says that either we could say that the reason is because this is a Torah law, and we wanted women to be obligated in it just like a man, and that's what the Torah is teaching us. But if we use afein ha'ba'os hanes, which is only a rabbinic concept, then women would only be chayiv in matzah in a rabbinic level, and that's not what the Torah wanted. The Torah wanted a biblical level obligation for women. That's one possibility. Tosos says, well, maybe not. Maybe afin hayos hanes, even though it's a rabbinic law, it could still, or a concept, it could still obligate a woman in a Torah level. So why didn't we use afin? Why do we need these psukim? The Gemara says, Tosos says, because there's a famous Gezerah Shava of Yud Hey, or Tesvav, that we learn different halachos from Sukkot to Pesach. They both occur on Tesvav of the month, Tishrei and Nisan, and very often the Gemara learns halachos from one to the other. And the Gemara, and therefore Tosos says that I would have said, just like on Tesvav Tishrei, women are pater from sitting in a sukkah, so too on Tesvav they are pater from eating matzah, and therefore that Gezerah Shava would have won out over afin hayaba'os hanes. So if we had said women are chayiv in matzah because of afin hayaba'os hanes, that wouldn't have worked, because the Tesvav Gezerah Shava would have outweighed that afin hayaba'os hanes. Even though hypothetically afin, being a rabbinic concept, could still obligate women in a biblical level. But this pasuk is from a pasuk. It's a smichus. It's a stronger drasha than a Gezerah Shava, where we learn words from one pasuk to the next. So be that as it may, so far so good. Women are chayiv in daled kosos, no different than a man's obligation, and women are chayiv in matzah as well, no different than a man's obligation. And we see that in the halacha of the isser of eating achilas matzah be'erev Pesach, right? There's a halacha that you're not allowed to eat matzah on Erev Pesach. The Ramah says, Haga, have a matzah sheyotzim ba b'layla, any matzah you could eat that night. Asurim lechol kol hayom arba'asa, so you're not allowed to eat the entire day of Erev Pesach. V'katan she'enu yodeim hashem esaprim b'layla mot mi'yetzias mitzrayim, but if you have a really small child who doesn't know what he's talking about of Yetzias Mitzrayim, he's too little, mutar l'hachilu, he's allowed to eat matzah. So when it says, Katan, he's allowed to, again assuming he's too little, says the Mishnah Berurah, she'enu yodeya ve'ein chilek bein katan lekatana. It doesn't matter if it's a boy or a girl. Meaning what? That anybody who is obligated, let's see if we can get that down here. Anybody who is, there we go. Anybody who is obligated to eat matzah is obligated not to, or is prohibited from eating matzah on Erev Pesach. So we see that halacha applies equally to a woman, because she is obligated in eating matzah just as much as a man is. Okay, it looks like our 15 minutes are just up. So now we are up to the question of whether or not a woman is chayiv in Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, and for that we will leave over for our next time we meet in class. Everyone, thank you for listening. Have a great day. Bye-bye.